Well, I mean, first of all, I was motivated with concern for the world my grandchildren are going to inherit. I've got 6 grandchildren. And anybody who reads the papers, anybody who's kind of tuned into the world notices that climate change is an issue for us. For us here, bushfires, extinction of various animals and plants. And when you're thinking about it personally, like when you have grandchildren, it starts to get very personal. And of course, I've always been interested in people. I mean, as a journalist and as a writer, I'm curious. And I was intrigued then that knowing that we are the only ones that have the future of the world in our hands, our uniquely opposable thumbs. Um, and the people we've put into political position in our society to run our society, the decision makers, how can we make sure these people who are just like us can actually get on with making the correct decisions? And of course, because I'm very thorough and obsessive and curious, I decided that what I should do is take a kind of panoramic view of our history. What sort of creatures are we? How do we become like this? And what's going to happen to us in the future? So I started off with the Paleolithic period to the near future. I started with our nearest relatives, the great apes, and explored what makes us similar and different from chimps or gorillas. Then I explored the world of paleoarchaeology, the people who discovered the bones of the long dead ancestors, paleoarchaeologists, and they sort of pieced together from the bones how people lived and how they stood and what they ate and possibly what they thought. And then I looked at the evidence from ancient DNA paintings in Spain and France from 40,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, and from ancient DNA recoverable from all of those bones and things that people had discovered. And you can look in the ancient DNA in populations and how populations move from one place to the other. And I looked at sort of basically how we became who we are, how it became like this, how we discovered language and how we discovered society, in a sense that it turns out that we are a creature that needs other people. And we do our best when we're all working together. We share language, we share history, we share ideas, we develop because we do it together. And in the book's second half, I looked at sort of hints for what to expect in the near future. I have a chapter on transhumanism, which involves an attempt to extend life via pre-cryonics or freezing bodies at the point of death in the hope that in the future someone will have the inclination to unfreeze those people and fix whatever was ailing them, thus extending their lives into a sort of fascinating future. I met experts in artificial intelligence, people who want to solve climate change through geoengineering, and those who are working on all kinds of implants that might make us not only human, but post-human, meld us properly with computer chips. I traveled the world in those years where you were allowed to travel to meet experts and also the sites of their work, whether it be laboratories or digs, archaeological digs. And each one of them, of course, gave me something that I was expecting, which was to talk about their work. But when I came back and when I thought about what had happened between us, I discovered that I had an insight into what makes us human, because they gave me something that I wasn't expecting. And each of the people I talked to gives me something more than I was expecting. And they gave me something about what it means to be human. Now, at the time I was writing, in this room where I am now, my youngest granddaughter, Layla, was at my feet because she was a baby in a bassinet and her mum was working and she dropped her off. And as I'm writing and as I'm researching, I sort of noticed that I had a toddler, or an infant, first of all, before she could even, when she was a really little baby in arms. And I thought, I've got a really handy example of small Homo sapiens who I could observe and come back to with my newly acquired knowledge. So as she grew up and she started to speak and she walked and she talked and she asked me questions, I began to see that everything I'd learned along the way, I could actually come back to this little human being and see if it fitted in. And it turned out that the book is a journey really with me to the past, to the future, meeting people along the way who teach me about their expert areas and about what it means to be human, as does my littlest teacher, Layla, and my other 5 grandchildren too. Of course, any time you do research, your view has to change, because why do the research if you're going to stay the same as before? So, okay, of course, I'm a naturally glass half full kind of person, because I can't see the point of pessimism. I see it as defeatism, especially if you're interested in doing something about the things you need changing. So if I'm starting from the position of something needs to happen in this world and we need to do something, I need to be not pessimistic to begin with, because realism, of course, is vital, but it needs to be tempered in order to look at a possibility for action. And I was, amused by finding Charles Darwin himself. He didn't allow himself to sort of drown in misery. And given that he was looking at the creatures that were no longer living anymore and thinking about doomed species, and he also has a lot of sort of problems with his digestion. So he's got his, he could be pretty miserable, but it turns out that he really liked his wife reading him novels twice a day to relax. He said he described it as a wonderful relief and pleasure, but only those books that do not end unhappily, he said, against which a law ought to be passed. So, even Charles Darwin wanted to read cheerful novels at the end of the day. So a vote for optimism. Some of the people that I interviewed, I noticed that, a lot of the people who were interested in the past were pessimistic about the future. But even a pessimist like Professor Bernard Wood, who I interviewed, who was an optimist about the music of Bach and the playing of Murray Pereira. And so there were things to be optimistic about. And even if it was about, the human ability to be creative. I was optimistic about the idea that our self-domestication, in a sense, led us to hyper-cooperation, and many of the prosperity and the peace that many of us enjoy today. We've got a history of empathy and revolutionary thinking and collaboration, as well as a history of bad things happening, of course. I mean, I'm still as awed by the first moon landing as I was some 52 years ago when I watched the footage as a schoolgirl, and I have been watching Mars landing. The recent Mars landings have been as exciting, to think that this is a car we've just landed on another planet. This is extraordinary. And now we're beginning to understand sort of events in other galaxies far, far away from us. I mean, thinking about how we might detect alien civilizations. We've observed water geysers on Jupiter's moon, Europa, and on my computer, I could see a picture of a black hole in a nearby galaxy, about 55 million light years from Earth. We can manipulate the nano world. We can do DNA snipping and pasting to remove deleterious genes. We all know, as I said, ways in which humans are good and terrible. But we do have evidence, for example, the success in addressing the hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica, which by 2019 had almost closed up. And this was because we had got together, worked out what the problem was, worked out what a solution was, and then did something about it. I mean, the last 70 years or so have been the longest period in human history without a major global conflict. So, democracy, self-expression, acceptance of diversity, they're spreading globally, despite wobbling perilously in some places and sometimes. And there's been an unprecedented explosion of developments in all of these areas. So we have now the chance to transition to a sustainable human culture based on renewable energy and food resources, eliminating poverty and disease, all kinds of things, provided we have the good sense to make these things happen. And in the second part of the book, I meet people who, far from being pessimistic, they're hyper optimistic, probably too optimistic as far as I can see. I mean, they foresee a future where the human is, you know, using technologies not just to make our lives easier, but to extend our physical and mental abilities, and you know, look at new ways of being. But really, I mean, there are lots of things. You know, they're saying we'll eat meat, but no animals will be killed. They'll be grown in laboratories. We might adapt our destroyed atmosphere by using artificial lungs, for example. We might regreen African tigers or something by using genetically engineered animals and placing them over there. So, I mean, there's all kinds of ways. You know, you might think they're odd, but, you know, there's a lot of things that we do now that you would have thought were odd 50 years ago. You wouldn't have been able to believe that we would be talking to each other like this over a digital world. And you probably wouldn't have believed that we would have another pandemic either. So, you know, you can't kind of say, oh, this will never happen. It's just not rational to say, oh, just because it doesn't feel right at the moment, that it won't happen in the future. I mean, the same is right, you know, with digital revolution. I mean, there will be rough patches. Of course there will be. There are always rough patches in any kind of new technologies and any sort of revolution. But the question is how we will minimize the suffering in order to take the greater advantage to some of the options that are offered to us. I mean, you know, I was immersed in the robotics and the AI world, and it turns out that, you know, these things are really great tools. I mean, if you look at the pandemic, AI was one of the first sources of notifying us there's something going on. There's something going on in China. People are dying from some sort of pulmonary problem. And AI was looking at where people were traveling, the chat on the various Chinese equivalent of Twitter, you know, what was being said, what was being observed, and that made us all aware that there was something going on. I mean, these are very new tools that we can use. And of course, human societies are complex, and the direction and outcome of upheavals is hard to predict. I mean, how could we have predicted where we are now? And but, you know, how could, you know, imagine, how could the Neanderthals predict what was going to happen to them when all these strange Homo sapiens came over the hill, and it was different. But how could they have predicted what was going to happen to them? But, you know, I think, yeah, I mean, in the end, I am optimistic because I do believe that we have the capabilities and the possibilities of changing this world. We have changed it. We can see how we've changed it in the last 200,000 years. You know, now things are moving much faster. So it's going to be about cooperation and communication, I think. But is there really an increasingly anti-science sentiment, though? I mean, I'd say that science and scientists have been the heroes in this last year or so. They're the ones who will make our path through this time possible. The identification of the virus and understanding its coding and progressing to the vaccine now took about 10 or 11 months. I mean, this is kind of brilliant and Herculean and impressive global effort of cooperation. I mean, there might be a small minority of people that talk to themselves on social media in little bubbles, which occasionally emerge in anti-vaccination demonstrations or climate denial articles in fringe publications. I mean, it's almost pointless trying to spend time trying to convince those who believe the earth is flat or that the moon landings were faked of what's true. I mean, you know, you could spend your time doing that, but who wants to? I mean, it's only when the fringe views of a minority threaten the health and safety of the rest of us that steps do need to be taken. and I'm reminded of what I used to say to my kids about eating vegetables. You don't have to like them, you just have to eat them. So I may not be able to make people see sense, but if they wish to take part in schooling, our health system, overseas travel, being in the same plane as me, they're going to have to prove that they've been vaccinated, for example, or have a medical reason for not doing so. Then that doesn't include the need to hold on to irrational ideas. I mean, there is such a thing as a social contract, and your right to hold an irrational view should not endanger my right to health and safety and the life of my family and my whole community. So, yeah, that's what I think. Well, of course, there are none so blind as those who will not see, and like dealing with people who don't believe in what is obvious. It's always hard to engage people, but research into ancient DNA shows that there are populations who have been geographically apart for a long time, and we can see that. We can see that people who have lived in Africa all for 200, 300,000 years have developed minor differences in skin color, in body shapes, in heights, their adaptation to altitude or other geographic conditions. And people who've lived mostly in the north of the planet have got similar minor differences in their skin color and their various adaptations. And more, though, of these populations are mixing and blending and moving around the globe as they have for hundreds and thousands of years. And now we're even finding that people we thought were really a different species to us, not a race, but a species, are actually closely connected. So Homo neanderthalis, for example, who had markedly different bodies, they were stouter, they were stronger, shorter than us, they had bigger brains than us, slightly different shaped crania. Well, most people who descend from North African lineages, including myself, have up to about 3% Neanderthal genes in them. So there was mixing and reproducing between those ancient variants. Denisovans, another group of people, we haven't even got a skeleton of those. We've got, a little finger here and there and a tooth. But we know from the ancient DNA that they were a different group too. And maybe there were others too. For more than 500,000 years, these people who we thought were different species occasionally met and occasionally produced offspring. The atmosphere in which we live and breathe now is a global commons. It doesn't differentiate on the national sources of warming carbon from the sites of droughts and wildfires and floods. And, we are all here on the planet, whatever race, whatever color, whatever, group you'd like to kind of nominate, we really have to coordinate and agree upon human goals for the technology set by diverse social and political systems without entering the old-fashioned and deeply familiar arms race between us. And I think of the people I've met and spoken with on this expedition, from making stone tools to the great future beyond. And they showed me of what it means to be hopeful and disappointed and continue to be hopeful again. I mean, they've acted on their hunches. They devote years of their lives to their research, their ideas, their imaginings. They made great strides in piecing together our evolutionary journey and making sense of our past. And they affirm that we are frail, our beloved ones die, there's more to life than we see on the surfaces of things. And, we might get sidetracked into building fences between us and having arguments between us. But really what we need to do is tear down the fences and try and get together to influence the kind of futures we want. It's going to be hard, of course, but we've done hard things before. And I think these days, we're looking at increasing fractioning into smaller groups, identities becoming more important to some people than coalescing our global resolve. And of course, the wrongs of the past need to be addressed because of, racial prejudices, sexual prejudices, and identity politics up to a point, but it often devolves into a waste of human energies that otherwise need to be marshaled for the task ahead. And we have to realize that, there's not your side or my side. We're on the same side because we're here on this little blue planet in this outer part of our galaxy. And climate change and extinctions are a threat to us all. And it's going to take an enormous feat of concentration for us to overcome psychological and political tendencies that evolution has encoded into our nature, of course, over hundreds and thousands of years. Fear of something other, fear of the stranger. Of course, it's part of our, the very deep but pretty primitive part of our brain. And we do have this frontal lobe now that we can actually use a bit more. And we do have the capacity for astonishing feats of cooperation. I don't think this sort of thinking is naive. It's realistic and it's urgent. Well, of course, we bypass Darwinian evolution the moment we use any form of modern medicine. Orthopedic surgery for a broken leg, heart surgery, diabetes treatments, much less reproductive technologies and more complex genetic engineering, glasses, civilization, education. All these factors mean that people who would have died of hunger or been killed and eaten by predators now get to grow up and add their genes to the next generation. So, yeah, I'm not worried so much about bypassing Darwinian evolution. I've had a broken limb. I'm glad that I bypassed Darwinian evolution then. It's really interesting. One of the moments in the book that was very moving for me was having a look at the skull of a 1.8 million year old Homo erectus man that had been found in the lair of a saber-toothed tiger. It's a long story, so you'll have to read the book and find out how it got there. But this was the skull of an old man. A Homo erectus, that was like a few iterations before us, but we're descended from them. So, about sort of 4'5" tall, about a third of the volume of our brain. But had some stone tools. Very primitive ones that they found in a pile nearby. So was using them in some way. But the interesting thing was this was the head of an old man, and he had one tooth left and a very diseased jaw. And that tells you that somehow he was surrounded by people who cared about him, that he was looked after, because you don't go around in Darwinian evolution, if you lose your teeth, you don't eat. If you have a diseased jaw and you're not helpful, you don't go and get your own food, you're dead. You're somebody else's lunch. So it was an indication of the very early kind of signs of empathy, of love, maybe. So, we have been doing things to avoid Darwinian evolution for a long time, even before we were Homo sapiens. So, no, I don't think we're taking too many risks. Well, I don't expect to see it in my lifetime, so it's a moot point. I'm not frightened, but I am intrigued as to how it might work and what the effects might be. I mean, we're already attached to computer networks in real time. I mean, Google Maps, COVID apps, my habit of Googling anything as soon as someone asks a question of me, my need to be attached to Twitter or news sites or WhatsApp, and the phone for family communications and weather alerts and what am I going to wear today and should I change now and is the afternoon going to rain, and my Garmin on my wrist to monitor steps and energy expenditure and stress. So the idea of an implant isn't so far-fetched. Freeing up my hands if I've got all these other implants, and I just will find a way of just looking stuff up in my brain. I have a granddaughter and a son-in-law who are both type 1 diabetics, and they have monitors and pumps delivering them insulin, which are read easily by an app on their phones and by my daughter remotely. So you could say they're bionic already, as anyone with a pacemaker is. Like any technology, depending on who develops them, their function is coded into their form. And many of these new technologies are developed by defense industries like DARPA, which is the United States Defence Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's a research and development agency of the United States Department of Defense, responsible for the development of emerging technologies for use by the military. Okay, so you'd be correct for imagining that surveillance and defense functions might be part of anything that comes out of there. But like any other military technologies, they can be adopted for other uses. So think space program and freeze-dried food and wireless headsets, and even, in fact, even an application for laser eye surgery. So let's not throw out babies with bathwater and remain open and curious about what lies ahead and what influence we can have on those developments. And it's up to us.